Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 5, I think, of this news report today. I was originally going to do 3. I always plan to do 3, and I run over if I just have a lot to get to, and I do 4. But while I was doing this article last video, my Firefox thing crashed as I was reporting on Google's fraud here. And so it crashed at 12 minutes and 30 seconds. But whatever, dude. I already have enough articles ready to go here, so we'll move on after Google dodges billions in U.S. taxes. Report says illegal immigrants from Mexico no longer crossing border in large numbers because there's no jobs. New report Thursday says the U.S. is no longer the beacon for illegal immigration that it was when the economy here was expanding. But it says the most support citizenship path for illegal immigrants, 48% not happy with how Obama is handling the immigration. So this whole hoopla about the fiscal cliff where you're going to lose possibly stuff that you paid into and social programs that were put there by tax dollars not to fund all these wars of aggression and empire building and supporting and securing the drug trade. Some 62% of American voters support giving illegal or undocumented immigrants a path to citizenship. So then we have unwanted at home, free to strike again, secret criminals. It says the U.S. quietly released 8,500 criminals who were supposed to be deported with deadly consequences. It says president's illegal immigrant uncle remains in U.S. for 20 years after court after order to leave country. The uncle of President Barack Obama has an upcoming deportation hearing to determine whether or not he can remain in the U.S. This is a follow-up to a 92 ruling that he had to leave the country that he has not adhered to. Public inauguration just for show, and it's likely to cost taxpayers over $100 million. It says here that it falls on a Sunday, and because of that, he will hold only a small, private swearing-in ceremony and will hold a big public redo the next day. That means the public inauguration is just a show, while the actual inauguration will again be behind closed doors, just as it was last time. China's State Grid Corporation to buy $500 million stake in ElectraNet. It's an electricity supplier. State Grid Corp has signed a $500 million deal to buy a 41-cent stake in South Australian electricity supplier, followed by Chinese group buys 80% of AIG plane unit for $4.2 billion. It's the nation's largest acquisition of a U.S. company. This is followed by the experts who break up families. It's the terrifying story of an MP branded an unfit mother by experts who never met her, a nightmare shared by many other families. It says here that a middle-class mother and Tory councillor was happily married. It says adopted on their 10-year-old son who loved going to school, whatever, right? Indeed, such Miss Allen standing in the community that is accountant and former investment banker. And it goes on, it says she devoted her spare time to council duties and blah, blah, blah. And it says it was heart-rending work. It says often this portrayal was supported by an expert report psychiatrist. It never occurred to me or any member of the panel that the information we were presented with might be distorted, twisted. It says Lucy's son was nearly taken into care when she was wrongly accused of putting his life into danger. She goes on and says her view has changed now that it's happened to her personally. She suspects that many of the damning reports were written by experts who had never met families in question to suit the wishes of social workers under pressure from the government to increase the number of children adopted. As a result of this process, more and more children are being taken into state foster care, or you could just say being abducted and kidnapped. Speaking of which, Alberta, Canada, takes aboriginal kids from parents at a high rate. The Child Protective Kidnapping Services take children away from their aboriginal indigenous parents at a comparatively high rate. It says it's a business. 32 officers took the children at gunpoint, treated us like terrorists. They said, "You are not getting your children back," said an aboriginal woman. When you go in there and check it out, yeah, here's a picture of them, a shot of these guys. Look at these guys, man. They're using these people to go in there and kidnap children. You know, Children Protective Services. Remember this story we just covered? Council defends taking foster children away from UK Independent Party members. Council refused to back down over its decision to remove 3 children from their foster parents because their membership of the UK Independence Party meant that they supported racist policies. But I also covered this. There is a what? The EU is seeking to ban the family, basically portraying traditional families as being barred. Books that reinforce traditional roles can contribute to gender stereotyping, says the report. So, traditional images of mothers caring for their children or fathers going out to work could be barred from schools under proposals by Brussels. The EU and the Euro rewarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of the Euro as a symbol of unity and rewards the European Union's federalist vision that will triumph over the current crisis the bloc's leaders have declared. So they created a crisis, they offer the solution. There you go. Very simple. 1 + 1 = 2. But they tell you 1 + 1 = 3. EU urges more pressure on Syria. So a nice peaceful Nobel Peace Prize recipient is pushing for supporting these terrorists and ousting a sovereign government. They get rewarded for that, kind of like Obama. Trooper charged with stealing cash. Connecticut state troopers charged with stealing $3,700 cash and a gold chain from a man killed in a motorcycle accident. He's an 18-year veteran of the force, but just a bad apple. Philly cop charged with leaving crash scene insurance fraud, says Philadelphia police say a 14-year veteran, again 14-year veteran, just one bad apple, not the whole tree, of the force faces charges after she allegedly left the scene of a crash while off duty and then filed a false insurance claim. In video, Collinsville cop says he put drugs on random vehicles to test police dogs. So it's just to test the police dogs. It wasn't to get you busted or be able to circumvent your rights as far as busting into your car. The officer explains in a recording posted online that officers sometimes planted or smeared illicit drugs on vehicles parked overnight at a business or motel to test the dog's abilities. The drugs would be retrieved, but he acknowledged that if the vehicles were stopped by other police later, a dog sniff could lead to the search of a motorist who would have no explanation for the scent. Is planting evidence a practice, he asked. This is the Madison County Public Defender. Probably not by most law enforcement officials. That's exactly what this is. So I think it's used by most, to be honest with you. I've seen them sitting there touching the sides of cars. They sneak around, skulking around your passenger side of your vehicle so you can't see them, but they could see you and they're touching your car. That's what they're doing. Homeland Security and FBI released documents once again labeling photographers as potential terrorists. From the roll call release dated November 13th, suspicious activity reporting photography gives a vague reference to a single example where terrorists may have used cameras to plant the attacks, even though the Supreme Court just ruled that it's okay to take photography of revenue collectors. Female cop accused of ripping film out of witness camera after the Kelly Thomas, I think he was a homeless man, beating death. So far, 3 cops have been charged in the beating death of Kelly Thomas. Yeah, a homeless, mentally ill man whose death sparked an outrage in Sleepy County of Fullerton last year. Nationwide outrage once the surveillance video of his murder was released earlier this year. Meanwhile, the other 3 cops who were involved in the beating are all doing everything that they can to keep from being charged. But there's one cop that is yet to be exposed, and her hands are just as dirty as the rest of them. It says we don't know her name, but we know that she confronted a photographer who had been taking pictures of the grisly scene after the beating and ripped the film out of the camera. Later that night, they spoke to a homeless man whom they had met at the same bus depot where Thomas was murdered. Not only confirmed the same story, but said it was the female cop who ripped the film out of the camera. Said it's not surprising that her name has not been exposed, considering she arrived afterwards and was not caught in the initial confrontation, especially considering the cover-up stemmed from the top down. Obama regime investigating sergeant who said the Bible condemns homosexuality. So the U.S. Department of Education or Re-Education has launched a federal investigation over a conversation between a Huntsville JROTC instructor and a lesbian student about the Bible and homosexuality. It goes on here, and it says that the high school student 15 asked a local homosexual activist to file a complaint on her behalf after a first sergeant allegedly told her that he believed the Bible said homosexuality is a sin. It is unclear how the conversation began. The world's most dangerous religion is atheism. Atheism face worldwide persecution, says the report. So it goes on, it says from the Christian West to the Islamic Middle East, atheists face discrimination and persecution, including execution, life in prison, the revocation of citizenship, and denial of education and medical services in a new report. This is a 69-page study. It's called Freedom of Thought 2012, a global report on discrimination against humanists, atheists, and non-religious, has been released by the WHO, by the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Remember that, the IHEU. So we go down, International Humanist and Ethical Union. It says an umbrella organization, and it goes on. It says it's founded in Amsterdam in 1952. Democratic Union, more than 100 member organizations. Julian Huxley, the first director of UNESCO, presided over the founding Congress of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Meat wars. Russia denies U.S. meat ban is a revenge for the Magnitsky Act. So that's what we were talking about earlier. Russian authorities say restrictions on U.S. meat imports have no political motivation. Meanwhile, the argument is about to become another WTO row or argument or raft or melee for Russia just months after it joined the organization. So Russia's veterinary regulator introduced stricter control of the food supplement ractopamine and meat imports last Friday. The move was announced the day after the U.S. Senate approved the Magnitsky Act, which imposes sanctions against Russia officials. Rothschild's Reuters says the move could jeopardize U.S. meat exports to Russia worth $500 million a year. The American suppliers will become less competitive compared with Chinese and European producers, where ractopamine is also banned. It says more than 210 shipping containers of U.S. pork and beef worth $20 million were on its way to Russia. Reuters quotes. It says also the U.S. Department of Agriculture has no testing or certification program in place for this, according to USMEF. This is what these trade agreements do. It says, meanwhile, the U.S. authorities have urged or threatened Russia to lift restrictions on the supply of U.S. meat, claiming they violate WTO obligations. But basically, what this guy says, he says they can cause heart problems in humans. In November, the EU accused Russia of increasing protectionism and warned that it might submit a complaint to the WTO. Why don't you let your people get poisoned like the U.S. does? Oklahoma rancher in Russia threatens U.S. beef imports. I've covered this back, in the summer 2012. They're talking about Russia basically starting to import more beef. It goes on and says this American rancher from Oklahoma is at the forefront of Putin's plan to cut Russia's $3 billion annual bill as the world's biggest beef importer. He's passing on cattle rearing skills to locals in Russia and a drive towards self-sufficiency that's already involved shipping in about 60,000 Aberdeen Angus cattle from the U.S. and Australia. It goes on and it says that with incomes rising and beef sales set to increase, Russia has been cutting import quotas to revive cattle breeding tradition decimated under the ruler of dictator Joseph Stalin. Putin wants a country to meet 85% of its meat and poultry needs by 2020. FDA increases allowed radiation doses of meats for human consumption, so no wonder why they don't want to, it's like, come on, guys. Rather than actually take the time to address the root causes of meat and poultry contamination, which more often than not are a direct result of unsanitary factory farming practices, the USDA or FDA has instead decided to simply up the doses of radiation that industrial food producers are allowed to blast on their filthy, contaminated meat products. A new rule recently published by the Federal Register, FDA specifies that unrefrigerated, uncooked meat can now be irradiated right alongside refrigerated, frozen, and cooked meat. From 12/5/2012, would you like extra ractopamine, with your pork, sir? So if you haven't heard of the drug before, you're probably not alone. But if you've eaten intensely reared pork, beef, or turkey, then you will almost certainly have consumed meat from animal that has been fed the drug. It says in recent tests basically pork samples from 6 U.S. cities, Consumer Reports found low levels of this ractopamine in almost 1/5 of the 240 pork products analyzed. It says including other nasties, several strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The EU, China, Taiwan, and more than 100 countries have long banned its use because of concerns of the effects of ractopamine residues in meat on human health. But it goes on as the proponents of industrial farming are very quick to point out that it's perfectly safe and there's no risk to humans consuming meat from the treated animals. Indeed, they argue the ongoing ban on the ractopamine-tainted meat imports by China and the EU is simply an act of trade protectionism to protect their farmers from more efficient production practices, more efficient. That's why I was, like I was saying, questioning capitalism. Then we have drug overuse in cattle imperils human health. These 2 kids died recently in Kansas City from antibiotic-resistant infections. They tried all kinds of drugs. They blamed the overuse of antibiotics in livestock, according to the doctors. Tenderizing meat is a potential hazard used at most chain restaurants and stuff like, which lead to a higher risk of E. coli poisoning. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.